Won't. Okay, so we're going to start recording here. Welcome to the end of June 2019 dealer webinar for dealers in the hashtag Buy All Sell Nation with Aberhard Ag Solutions. Thanks so much for doing business with us. We appreciate all you guys, and we want to endeavor to keep you guys updated on a monthly basis with news and tips and tricks and experts. And hence, we have a very special guest today on the line, so to speak, Ray Dowbenko. If you look him up on LinkedIn, he's basically an international knowledge expert, I believe. Is that how you would refer to yourself in public?
That's kind of you.
Hey, where's your video?
Oh, I'll put it back on.
Oh, you were being shy. Sometimes Ray gets stage fright.
There we go.
Awkward. There we go.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ray. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your bio.
Well, I didn't know we were going to do this. I thought I was at the end.
Well, no, I'm going to do a quick update, but we might as well introduce
Okay, perfect. So I'm Ray Dowbenko, recently retired from Agrium/Nutrien last August. Spent 30 years of my career doing research and development, answering questions for farmers and retailers about fertilizer and crop nutrition. So get a chance to help folks out around the world. I've had a very fortunate career, and now I'm just dabbling with friends and buddies and old friends who want a hand every once in a while, trying to keep current and not just become an old guy sitting at the back of the room.
You're very current, and you're certainly not just an old guy sitting at the back of the room. And the reason that we're doing this is because, we've talked about sulfur a lot in many different ways. Basically, we've taken, everything that Elston's taught us and espoused it us in the marketplace. But really, it's great to have some different perspectives on sulfur. We're going to hear some of your knowledge and view on sulfur today. And I love looking for any excuse working with Ray because he's one of my who's in my knowledge network, which is a privilege to have such learned folk amongst us to share with us and learn. So I'm genuinely excited to learn from you today, Ray. I was walking around getting myself a coffee in a daze this morning, Friday morning blues or whatever before the long weekend. I was just thinking, man, I have a super high fact finder, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about sulfur in general. So I think that's going to be really good, but I want to update the network here a little bit. I may get some emails and texts as we go here. Sorry not to interrupt, but sometimes it can be pertinent to the conversation here. So I'm going to share. I'm going to share my quick keynote here on a few things that we're doing to update. So I wanted to have a squirrel on the board just because it is summer. We should acknowledge that fact. It's relatively rare, and especially in this age of global warming. What is the window for summer now between winter storms and tsunamis or whatever? It's like 10 days. So hopefully you're going to enjoy your long weekend with loved ones on the water somewhere. I'll be working, but that's my lot in life. Are you doing anything cool for the long weekend, Ray?
I'm going to vacuum the house, take a few branches off the trees, dig a trench for drainage, that kind of stuff.
Okay, great.
I'll be drinking whiskey all the time, though. So that's okay.
So you're basically going to be like a drunken groundskeeper.
Day in, day out, nothing changes.
I look forward to retirement as well. So we have these two choices: stick to the agenda or wing it. We love wing it. Sweating bullets over here. But you can actually chat within this webinar or text me, of course, anytime if you have questions for Ray as we go. Safety first. In terms of the safety portion, I wanted to mention you can go to our website here. I'm going to bring this up. In the dealer portal, it's absolutely amazing what you can find in there. So I'm just going to share this here. Lots of switching around, but Safari favorites. So you just go to your friendly neighborhood Aberhard Ag Solutions website, and you go into the dealer portal, and you put in the secret password, which I cannot reveal unless we've had a 7-step verification program. It's dealers with a capital D. Going to safety here, and safety is a big deal because the reason is that there's a liability that passes from the applicator to Aberhard Ag Solutions to GFL in the event of $1 million terrible events that happen. And so everyone in the value chain is extremely concerned with safety. But I feel like you and me, Ray, we've already kind of covered off the safety basis for this morning, given we know how to operate this webinar safely.
I know where my emergency exits are and my backup exit and where the bathroom is.
Yeah, the bathroom. Do you have a muster point?
Yeah, actually, I do. I do. Actually, I have two. One at the front, one at the back, and one out the bathroom window on the second level if we can't get out the front or the back. That's three.
I wanted to share with you guys too. It's really exciting because I'm just so stoked about the work that Allison and Alyssa are doing in the backstage here with resources. So we had an amazing webinar again the other day, and we sent it out with an email. We had a public webinar. We had 30 people on the webinar. We had the tissue test conversation with Terry and with Elston. So now, if Alyssa's been working on this resource page, which I just love. So if you go in here, you've got BioSol resources, Club Root resources. That was from our conversation with Dan Orchard. And this tissue testing webinar, I'm telling you guys, there's some magical stuff in here. This was awesome. The Art and Science of Tissue Testing full webinar. The highlights are incredible. The full webinar is incredible. It's just, if you watch this webinar, you're thinking about how to farm and how to work with your customers will change. And it's a huge diagnostic tool that I think is completely underrated and underutilized in the industry. And I'm really proud that over time, as we've been pounding the drum on that particular knowledge piece, I'm hoping that more people will tissue test. I'm really excited about the Midsummer Tribe Builder that's coming up on July 15th. It's the day before Ag in Motion on Monday at noon. So on July 15th, the Monday before the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of Ag in Motion at noon, we're having a Midsummer Tribe Builder dealer training and focus group. And on the agenda, we're going to have Jason Barris talking about some sales tips and tricks. And then we're really going to get into conversation. One of the biggest things we got back from you guys that you guys wanted to take part in was talking to other dealers. That was one of the big feedback things that we got back from the summit, Ray, is that our dealers want to talk to each other, learn from each other. So this is a great forum type opportunity for people to do that. So sales is going to be a paramount discussion. The agronomy discussion is going to be really great. We're going to have Elson Solberg come in there. His talk is called "Don't Cry About Your Sulfur. Here's a Tissue." I like that, Ray. Huh? Huh?
Yeah.
Yo. And then Matt Gosling's going to come, and his talk is called "Sulfur Levels Keep on Rising, Papa." I think that's an old Johnny Cash song. But of course, we all know and love Elston, and there's Matt Gosling and Jason Barris. But this is some interesting stuff here, Ray. We are going to have a webinar in July, I think after Ag in Motion. But Matt's flying out in the morning of the Monday to come talk to us at the Midsummer Tribe Builder about they have collected like 3,500 data points from all their clients that have been using BioSol over time. And this is what their clients' sulfur levels look like after using BioSol. And so they started, can you tell on this chart, Ray, and I don't know if you're seeing this, Elston, but can you guys see where BioSol was invented?
2013, I think, is where it peaks out. I can't read it on the screen.
Yeah, what happened in 2014 here, folks? That was the first year after applying BioSol. Sulfur levels through the roof. The other people, I'm sure you saw that. Basically, you know, Matt and I had a conversation a couple months ago, and it's like, well, let's get all this data from all of your clients into a forum that we can use and talk about. Because what had come up, we had a customer that had used biosol in a couple quarter sections, and then 3 years in, he was crying foul on social media about biosol being a miracle product because they found that the soil test was calling for some sulfur, which technically, we discussed at length in the tissue testing webinar, isn't necessarily that you will be deficient. So we just wanted to get more data, and Matt's one of the guys who got the most data out there on biosol. So he'll be sharing information with us. So we had this format a couple years ago in Calgary, and I think it was one of our best meetings ever. We just had a lot of really great conversation and breakout groups and networking and hearing lots of great ideas about how to move the business forward. And I'm really excited about this event. I think we got about 20 people coming so far. We wanted to have it. It's going to be low cost and low key. Come in a little bit early at noon. Hopefully you're already going to the show. Probably just going to have some beer and pizza that night, some fellowship. There's Elton, all wacky as usual. His hair is even crazier than it is now. Can you see that, Elston?
Yeah, that's me.
That is you. That is the epitome of you. That'd be a great picture for your obit. But yeah, we're going to be at Ag in Motion all 3 days. We've got a tent and we've got beer. That's about it. It's just, we've moved all the hoopla of the big show, the growing the future and all that stuff to Farm Forum. That's a whole different deal. We're going to be diamond sponsors at Farm Forum at TCU Place in Saskatoon this year, which is going to be epic. But that's beyond the scope of this webinar. And but yeah, we're going to be at Ag in Motion. Come work the booth with us. Come have some beers. Bring your customers by. And we're also going to be going to the Field of Stars event. I'm on the committee there, and we've been trying to raise money for Stars via this event. And it's absolutely an amazing event. Hunter Brothers will be performing, Saskatchewan's own, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So looking forward to that. Listen, guys and gals, it's last day. Well, technically not the last day. The last working business day. Well, some people are going to be working through the week. The last Friday of the early order program. And so if you haven't closed a bunch of customers on it, at least you've spoken to them about the opportunity and made them aware, and that's our whole philosophy of pricing transparency. Show them that they have the opportunity. Maybe cash is tight in June and they want to order later, pay $20 more in October, but they've had this opportunity. We have pricing transparency. And I really like that, and a lot of our dealers really like that, and a lot of our customers really like that. And it's really a decision. Like here, we know it's the worst time to order ahead for 5 years of sulfur supply. That's why the price is as low as it is, to get you to take that opportunity. And every single month, Ray, if you were a selling biosol dealer, every single month you can have that conversation. Hey, man, where are you at on your decision-making process? Do you need more information? Because the price is going up $5 next month. I just wanted to let you know as a service. Amazing sales technology. Before it was, never known to man. We basically invented it. I'm getting carried away now with that. Biosol Nation payment terms: 40% down, 60% on deliver. Super simple. If you need any other terms or have any other objections, let us know. We will work with you as usual. You can use FCC and Scotiabank. And the pricing comparisons on our website, you can check that out. The dealer portal, I already touched on that. Accounting and administration staff, as always, if you have any questions, you can get a hold of Allison at aberhardagsolutions.ca or our super awesome bookkeeper, Debbie Sherritt, Debbie at aberhardagsolutions.ca, or admin at aberhardagsolutions.ca will get you the answers that you need. I'm not going to do a logistics update today because even though Jean-Claude Van Damme can do the splits, and that's extraordinary, that's just incredible. Isn't that, Ray?
Yeah. It's different.
Different. That's not your everyday occurrence. Really don't have a lot to talk about with with that. So with that, we are going to get to our professional education portion of the event, which we do plan on sharing with the public, Ray, just so you know. So watch your P's and Q's, brother.
Will do.
This might go on the internet.
No, I don't think it's that important, but you might.
You don't think sulfur and the production of food for humankind is important?
My perspective. My perspective.
Okay, stop with the humility. Stop with the humility. Ray Dowbenko, an international thought leader on plant nutrition, is with us today. He's going to talk about sulfur. And I'm really excited to hear Ray's perspective on sulfur with all of his many years of experience in the industry. So I can work the slides for you, Ray.
Okay, that'd be good if you got that.
But I think with that, Ray, you can take it away. I put your presentation in here and hit it.
Perfect, thanks. Appreciate it, Dan. Good morning, everyone. You know, Dan said to get rid of the humility. The idea is it's probably a lot of this is going to be reminder. Some things are going to be some pointers at the end, but you've been listening to the guru of sulfur for decades in Elston, so there's really not a lot more than I can say, other than offer the opportunity, as Dan said at the start, for questions and chat. And hopefully if there are some things that are sitting in the back of your mind, or you've had some second thoughts, or somebody's tried to introduce doubts into your mind, that would be a useful thing to take the opportunity to talk about. So in any case, I want to remind some basic crop nutrition points in this particular slide about the issue of nitrogen to sulfur ratio being important. And Dan had mentioned the webinar that Elston did on tissue testing on behalf of Aberhart Ag, and talking about different ratios, and that's something we need to consider, as especially we start adding more sulfur in growing crops like canola, soybeans, corn. We're putting on an awful lot of nitrogen to get that yield, but you do have to remember there's a certain amount of sulfur that is required, mostly to help form chlorophyll and amino acid production to relate to protein formation.
And when you're talking to producers in general, where do you find sulfur fits into their thinking in order of importance of nutrients for the crop?
Some of that is predicated on the crop they're growing, but in general fertility, most growers tend to, and no disrespect to the higher end growers or more progressive growers, but most growers tend to only think about sulfur if they're growing canola. May get the odd person think about it for alfalfa, and you know, these are mistakes. Obviously you have to think about sulfur for canola for sure, but we think about it for wheat, we think about it for corn, alfalfa, soybeans. And a general rule of thumb is whatever you're doing for phosphorus management in terms of rates of application, the crop pretty much takes up the same amount of sulfur. And so when you're having that sulfur discussion, that's always been a useful comment to make, is to remind the client, excuse me, that in terms of sulfur nutrition, it's equivalent to phosphorus nutrition and rates of application, and that helps open up the conversation of sulfur.
So there's a link there between how much phos a crop needs and how much sulfur a crop needs?
If we look at crop nutrient removal across the prairies and generally around the world for different crops, the amount of phosphorus removed per unit of production is pretty much the same in most cases as the unit of sulfur for unit of production.
So is getting enough sulfur on in general across North America a similar challenge to phos, or they have their own unique?
I think it's a challenge because people have recognized phosphorus's benefit for many, many years. And we've always had adequate sulfur in most of our production systems. With the change in environmental regulations, we're seeing less sulfur deposition. Certainly in the U.S., when I travel in the Corn Belt, in the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot more sulfur deficiencies appearing and a lot more interest in adding sulfur. There's still people out there saying, oh, we've got lots of sulfur, you don't need to add it. And I think that's a bit of a mistake to just offhandedly dismiss the idea of sulfur nutrition. I think you have to look at it for every crop that we grow and not just assume that because you're growing wheat, you don't need sulfur. I still think you need to evaluate your crop production system based on sulfur nutrition.
And in your experience, how often or frequent, or what's the prevalence of use of ratios for nutrients? Is this a common thing? Is this common knowledge, or?
I think it's fairly common. It was more prevalent when we started growing canola many years ago. We could see adding more and more nitrogen in the crop going backwards, reducing yield, because adding more nitrogen wasn't what we needed to do. We needed the balance with sulfur, and I think that was well recognized and still well recognized. And I think people generally, if they're growing canola, are putting on 20 to 30 units of sulfur, or managing their sulfur program with something like Biosol to make sure there's sulfur available to match the nitrogen. It's still, in my world, a bit cloudy after 30 actual pounds of sulfur being available, whether or not there's an additive benefit. So, Dan, to your comment about ratios, if I've been adding 90 pounds of nitrogen to my canola crop, for example, and you can go to the next slide, that's okay. All right. And now I'm adding 120 because I've got a better hybrid, a better production system, higher yield potential. I'm managing my water with crop intelligence. I know what my in-season yield potential gains can be. I'm going to be adding more nitrogen from 90 to 120 or 120 to 130. And people start to ask, well, do we still have to balance that nitrogen to sulfur ratio? And I, that's where I say I'm a bit cloudy, because I think after 30 pounds of actual sulfur being available to the crop, research would probably say more and more is not always beneficial. It's good to have in the soil and be protected and have it there for future crops or next year's crop. But whether I should agonize over my ratio being 7 parts N to 1 part sulfur or 5 to 1, I think that's more of an issue when you're not adding enough sulfur. So the ratios I've used to remind people that they should be looking at the ratio for bare minimum, not worry so much if they already added 30 units of sulfur and they want to add more because they're adding more nitrogen. I think that's a case-by-case discussion. And in the research, what I've seen is after 30 pounds of sulfur, I haven't seen a big benefit to adding more if I'm adding a little bit more nitrogen.
Awesome.
So this slide just speaks to the comment earlier about Dan's question about how do growers look at sulfur, and the easy or the low-hanging fruit has always been canola. Now this is a low-yielding number for canola, but the point is we're taking up roughly about 0.9 pounds of sulfur for every bushel of canola we're growing. So, back in the day, in Saskatchewan average still might be, 25, 27 bushels of canola. Manitoba average might be 32, 34, but we're growing consistently 40 and 50 and 60 bushel canola, and we're taking out a lot of sulfur. So to the slide you put up about, Matt's work and Elston's comment about 2000 and 2014 Biosol, we do have to remember, and although we're going to get to this in the next slide about mineralization of sulfur, you do have to remember, if you are growing these 50 and 60 bushel canola crops, or you're growing soybeans that are taking up, roughly 0.4 of a pound, close to half a pound of sulfur for every bushel of soybean, you are removing a fair bit of sulfur. And so you do have to consider adding sulfur not just for your canola crop, but for the mindset of the crops that are following the canola, be it wheat or corn type of thing, or soybean.
I can't believe how many pounds is required for alfalfa. And the weird thing is how many producers are fertilizing alfalfa with sulfur.
I can hear Elston just shaking his head going, oh man. Because back in the day, like 30 years ago, guys grew alfalfa, any kind of forage, but they grew alfalfa just thinking, well, it fixes its own end, so we don't need to use any fertilizer. But it's a huge user of sulfur and also potash as well. And so, looking at a sulfur program in alfalfa is extremely important for a forage grower, especially if he's looking for quality alfalfa. Back to the comment about sulfur and protein. If I'm deficient in sulfur in my alfalfa, it's not only hurting the yield, it's hurting the quality. And if you're feeding that to dairy, your milk value, your feed value, your relative feed value all go down because you don't have adequate sulfur.
That's incredible. We just had a dealer send me a video.
Elston wants to chime in.
Oh, sorry, Elston, go ahead.
Yeah, I got to chime in and then I got to go. So on Wednesday, I was in Havre, Montana, and there was a couple of marketing gurus there. And one of the things that they said is, given the crop conditions and so on in the U.S., that we we can expect to see half decent protein scales again this year. So while Ray's on the topic of protein, those of you that have got Biosol in the program, you've got a very important component of protein production in your system. Just make sure that if your yield is trending higher than what your yield goal is, that you do something about your nitrogen, so that if you do grow big wheat crops, you've got enough N there to support not only the yield but also the protein, because if these gurus are correct, we can expect some decent scales, and probably not like 2017, but something to think about.
Thank you, Alston. Appreciate you coming on.
Perfect.
Yeah, man, and Ray can expand upon that whole deal, but some of you have crop intelligence in your region or on your farms, and a tremendous number of fields are tracking well above yield goal. So there's plenty of opportunity to get in there and capture more yield and more quality. And if the protein scales are there, you'll win twice, not just once.
Great.
So with that, guys, I gotta go on a field tour here in sunny Swift Current, and have a great day.
Thanks, Alston.
Put your boots on.
See you, man.
Keep it real.
See you, Alston.
So that's crazy. Alfalfa, Biosol would be a great.
Well, I think it's a great fit, especially for a long-term program, Dan, and for guys that are taking alfalfa out of production, starting getting back into small grains and oil seeds. That alfalfa field's going to be extremely low in sulfur if they haven't been managing it, and the Biosol has a great long-term fit to keep that soil level of sulfur up long-term. Always something oxidizing. We'll talk about that at the very end. Always something oxidizing, now is something coming available. And so you've got long-term availability. Press-lets in the ground that hasn't oxidized is still protected, right? It's not going to go anywhere. So these are important long-term management perspectives. And, back to the comment about sulfur and how growers think about that, again, 30 years ago, the mindset was completely different than what it has to be today. People have to be managing today. Hopefully their cash flow allows them and their land ownership allows them to think long-term and to make these decisions, as you put up in the slide before about your pricing and the terms, is thinking long-term about how you manage it. The fertility, it's an investment in your farm. It just makes sense. It's like regular maintenance on a farm vehicle: oil changes, transmission fluid flushes, coolant flushes. It keeps the vehicle running longer. Same thing with fertility. It's analogous to not managing maintenance of your vehicle, not managing maintenance of your fertility. You're eventually going to have a breakdown. And to Elston's comment about protein scales as an example, you have a breakdown in a year when crop prices have jumped and you've lost, X bushels of production. You got 10,000 less bushels, and the price goes from, $570 to $630, and all of a sudden you've got $30,000 that you've lost because you didn't pay attention to regular maintenance and you had a breakdown.
We did have a question from the audience here. How much sulfur is left for the next year after canola if you apply 40 pounds and you get a 40 bushel crop?
You'd like to think it's a check and balance, that if you put in 40 units and you use roughly 40 units, that you've got nothing left. But you do have mineralization, roughly, and we'll get to this slide coming up, but you're going to get about 5 pounds of sulfur mineralized for every % organic matter in the soil as a rule of thumb. There is still going to be some deposition from the atmosphere. So how much is left over is going to be, you'd think that, okay, if I grew 40 bushel canola, I put 40 pounds of sulfur on, you should have nothing left. It doesn't always work that way, but it'll be very similar to nitrogen. You'll be quite low, but I wouldn't say you would have used everything. There'll be some leakage in the system and some gains in the system. It's like growing 50 bushel canola and saying it needs 150 pounds of N. You put on 150 pounds of N, and at the end of the year, you've got 30 left in your soil test. It doesn't use everything, and you're going to have some mineralization and some deposition. So, sorry, long-winded Ukrainian words, But if you grew 40 bushel canola, put on 40 pounds of sulfur, you'd expect to be low in sulfur, but I don't think you'd be like next to nothing. And again, the soil test for sulfur, because of variability in the field, the chemistry of the test is accurate, but the variability in the field is very large. So if you wanted to take grid samples every acre, you'd probably get a good handle of what is actually left over in sulfur. But if you're poking 20 or 25 holes in a field, you're still going to have a lot of variability. So it's a difficult thing to answer. I'll say you'd be very low, but you're still going to have sulfur left. You won't have depleted it completely.
Thank you.
So back to the humility stuff and things you already know. These are reminders coming up, Dan. We recognize that sulfur in the ground is mobile, right? That's why the biosol has its fit to provide available sulfur coming out as a sulfate form, and the residual, or the bank, if you will, is protected in the vault, and it's not going to move with water. But in the plant, it's not mobile, so it's not translocated from the lower leaves to the upper leaves. So when you look at deficiencies, and we're going to look at some coming up, just as reminders, it's on the upper part of the plant, but it's the younger growth on the upper part of the plant. And that becomes important when we start to scout fields for things like canola and for alfalfa. A little different in cereals. So we'll go to some of the pictures, Dan.
Okay.
So just a reminder, we always talk about curled and cupping leaves. So this is fairly young canola. You see the traditional textbook kind of symptoms of curled cupped leaves, and this is what we talk about, looking like little spoons. Now this year, and in the past couple of years, in some areas of Western Canada and Northern Great Plains, we've seen similar symptoms that weren't necessarily related to sulfur, but they were residual herbicide, or they were in-season herbicide drift problems, or they were looking like a manganese toxicity. Now, this would be a manganese toxicity, a very high pH soil, recent rain, or very low pH soil, pardon me, acidic soils, 5.5 and lower, high rainfall in the recent past, and some low pH acidic conditions causing the manganese to be extremely soluble and resulting in manganese toxicity. So obviously you're thinking about sulfur being in sandier parts in the field, hilltops, low organic matter parts of the field. You can start to distinguish one from the other in the terms of the herbicide. You think about the herbicide chemistry you've used in the past couple of years, what the weather's been like for residual herbicide buildup, if you're going to have an issue. And sometimes clients forget, oh yeah, I forgot I sprayed such and such on that wheat field last year and now I'm growing canola. Or you've got some drift issues. So the cupping is nice, but it's not always exactly textbook look that you're going to find in the field. So the next one we can go to, Dan. Again, back part of the leaves, we've got the cupping that's occurring, obviously a later growth stage here. We're getting on into potting, late flower, and you're seeing the curled up leaves, the cupping, and characteristic pinkish red color on the back part of the leaf. Now you may see this on the front part earlier in the season with sulfur deficiency, but later in the season you can get it on the back part. And this is already, this is getting pretty late. If this is when you see it, obviously you haven't been doing your job, because you should be out a lot earlier in the field to look for symptoms like this. And if you're seeing this, obviously you've either haven't applied sulfur, or the sulfur you've applied has probably been sulfate, very mobile, high rainfall, and leached. And the rule of thumb, inch of rainfall can start to move things like nitrate nitrogen and sulfate sulfur anywhere from 3 to 5 inches up to 7 to 10 inches, depending upon the soil texture. So 2 to 3 inches with an inch of rain in a heavier textured soil, and 5 to 7 inches with an inch of rain and sandy soil can start to move things like sulfate and nitrate. So you can get, obviously, heavy rainfalls like they had, let's say, the Swift Current, Kyle, a couple of weeks ago, 4 inches to 5 inches, some guys told me, in an hour and a half. So you can flush your sulfate and your nitrate nitrogen like 6 or 7 inches in a couple of hours. Now, if you've got the biosol program going, Dan, you've got sulfur that was available that's at risk, but you've got sulfur that's still oxidizing that's going to make up the difference and is not at risk to the leaching. So it's the long-term management that we'll talk about towards the end about the biosol part of the program. Next slide. A little bit washed out. Maybe go to the next one, and you can see sulfur-deficient cereal or wheat on the left. And it is the upper younger leaves that are lighter green. The bottom leaves still maintain their green color. Now, Elston made a comment about the protein premium. Back in the day, when I was living in Saskatoon and started in the industry, we'd funded a master's student doing sulfur nitrogen research in northeastern Saskatchewan. He was actually from the University of Manitoba, and it was funded by Shared Fertilizers, who I worked for at the time, and the Canadian Grains Council and the Canadian Wheat Board. Back in the day, they still existed. And we found that in those, now this wasn't, this was a high rainfall area in the Melfort region, but high organic matter soils. But we found that with the nitrogen program, adding 15 to 20 pounds of sulfur, having that available, maintained the yield, built the yield, and kept the protein up in conjunction with the nitrogen to sulfur ratio. So don't discount putting sulfur on cereals and think it's only canola or alfalfa. The cereals definitely have a benefit to using sulfur, and to what Elston commented on about the protein and nitrogen. You can put a lot of nitrogen on, but if you don't have the sulfur there, you're not going to build the amino acids that need the sulfur to link up to form the protein. So cysteine and methionine are two amino acids that require sulfur for their formation. This amino acids link up to form proteins. And if you don't have the sulfur to form those two amino acids, whether it's feed value or whether it's protein formation, all the nitrogen in the world is not going to get you the protein. All the nitrogen in the world is not going to get you the yield. It's the same thing as putting on too much nitrogen on canola and no sulfur. You're going to see a yield drop. So we'll go to the next one. So corn, in Manitoba, Ontario, a lot more corn, not so much in Saskatchewan, Alberta. But characteristic soil here, very sandy, coarse textured soil, low in organic matter. This striping on the younger upper leaves is very common for sulfur deficiency in a crop like corn. And go to the next one, should be alfalfa. So I said earlier about the younger upper leaves, and this is one of the diagnostic problems you can have if you just drive by the roadside and don't get out of the vehicle to walk in the field and you see yellowing in an alfalfa field. So if you go and you look individual leaflets on the plant, you see the younger part of the plant at the top is yellowing off, but you see it at the bottom too, and you go, well, it's not sulfur, it's just it's the whole plant. But if you look at the individual stems, it's the younger leaflets on the individual stems that are showing the light green or the chlorotic color. It's not the whole plant necessarily as much as the younger leaflets on the individual stems. So it looks like the whole plant, but it's not. And that's the merit in getting out of the vehicle and having a walk through the field rather than just driving by and say, gee, that field looks yellow, I wonder what's wrong with it. So we'll move ahead. So as we've been talking about, sulfur doesn't move in the plant, but it does move in the soil. It's associated with organic matter in most soils. In the prairies, because of our, I guess, our soil chemistry, we have a fair bit of calcium, magnesium. A lot of our sulfates are associated with calcium, calcium sulfates, magnesium sulfates. Those are the predominant forms of sulfur minerals in the soil that are going to add. So back to that canola question about 40 bushel canola, 40 units of sulfur, what am I left with? The soil itself has a certain amount of supply over and above of what you've added. But we tend to look for the sandy soils low in organic matter, that's the OM, and soils that are subject to leaching that we've talked about. So move to the next one. So I referenced this earlier. Generally, anything lower than 2% we're going to find as being definitely sulfur deficient, and I'd probably push that to 3% and say, when I've got soils that are 3% and lower, I'm definitely going to be concerned about my soil sulfur level. And the comment about the rule of thumb here, roughly 1% organic matter can spit out or mineralize about 5 pounds of sulfur per year. So 40 bushel canola, close to 40 pounds of sulfur coming out. You put 40 on, you think you got next to nothing, but you do have some soil minerals supplying sulfur, and you do have mineralization of organic matter. So it's not a complete drawdown of the bank, but it is something that's going to get quite low if you're not adding enough sulfur for your canola. And we're going to talk about that in the coming slides, because this is a tie-in. I think the damage of seed-placed nutrients is something that we overlooked in the last number of years because we've had fairly decent weather. I grew up in Manitoba, and that was something we always felt it was always wet. If anything, we fought with it being too wet. Now people are saying, oh, we got a drought. It's dry because it's not as wet as it has been. And we're seeing more fertilizer issues, whether it's seed place, things like ammonium sulfate or sideband. We're still seeing it in the drier areas. So that's the point that I wanted to make to get to the end here. So
But help me understand the relationship here between organic matter and how we should treat our fertilizer applications. If you have 5% organic matter like we have at home at the farm, or if you have low organic matter like maybe 1 or 2%, how should you treat your approach to sulfur in those two different circumstances?
Well, I think in that perspective, if you want to be talking relative to 2% versus 5 or 7, I think the sulfur program is just as important in that 5 to 7% organic matter soil as in the lower. And you may think that's a bit odd, but generally you have higher organic matter because your crop production potential is higher, and your crop production potential is higher because you have more rainfall. So your susceptibility to loss mechanisms is likely to be higher in the higher organic matter soil, which makes keeping the sulfur up just as important because your loss potential is higher. In the low organic matter soil, it's low because you likely have lower yield potential. You also have lower potential to mineralize sulfur. So sulfur is important because it's generally low in that field, but the loss potential is lower. So, you may think about adding less sulfur to a lower potential yielding field, which makes sense, but you also have to be cognizant of what the mineralization capability is of that low organic matter soil. So they're equally important, Dan. One, because you've got low sulfur to start with and less potential to get any more during the season, and the other one, because you do have mineralization potential, but you have higher loss potential. So if you match it with the crop yield removal for the bushels you're going to grow, I think that's a good way to start thinking about managing the sulfur.
Well, and it's often discussed that in, say along the canola growing belt of the number 16, for example, we might have more sulfur deficiency because of higher requirements for the crops and all that good stuff. But as opposed to the southwest corner of Saskatchewan, for example, they've been putting on more than adequate rates of sulfur for a very long time. So it's actually, my understanding is some of these regions in the southwest corner of Saskatchewan might have sulfur deficiencies just as much or more than some of the more northern areas that are more focused on growing canola. They just maybe haven't been as focused on sulfur long term.
I think they're not as focused on sulfur because their yield potential has been lower for many years, but they have been, like, when I lived in Saskatoon back in the day, it was kind of just when places like Swift Current were starting to grow canola, and we laughed. We said, well, it's too dry, you'll never get canola to grow there. No, obviously wrong. This was in the 80s. Yeah, this was in the mid-80s. And we laughed because it's not, it's too dry, it's never going to grow, but it grows there. And so back then, like, this is like close to 30 years. Yeah, 30 years ago, we weren't thinking about sulfur, but you grow 30 years of canola and we go from 2 million acres to 20 million acres in the prairies. And you do that at, 20 or 30 or 40 bushels a year, 20 or 30 or 40 pounds a year for 30 years of maybe 10 or 15 years really not applying anything near removal of sulfur. Yeah, a lot of sulfur deficiencies.
Okay, I just want to give you the 15-minute warning.
Yeah. You're the one that's taking the time, not me. I'm just here to answer questions.
Quit interrupting me, making your presentation.
Keep going. Next slide, Anna.
All right.
So we know that sulfate's immediately available, and we've talked about this leaching. And so that's the way we manage something that's an elemental form like biosol. We've got some that's coming available during the season or the previous fall's application, and you've got some protected and coming available to match against that loss potential. So it's kind of like a controlled release idea, is that you've got some coming available when the crop needs it, and what's in the soil is protected against these potential for losses. We'll move to the next one. This goes to the seed safety work, and this is work done by Jeff Shano at the University of Saskatchewan in conjunction with the Canola Council. The yellow bars are looking at plant stand emergence. So this is canola emergence for seed place phosphorus in the yellow bars where there's no phosphorus applied. And then in the series of blue bars, the light blue bar is 15 pounds of phosphate, and the dark blue is 30 pounds of phosphate in the seed row. And then at the very bottom is different rates of sulfur as ammonium sulfate sulfur applied in the seed row. So in the first 3 bars, the 0 is just showing that, okay, there's an emergence with no fertilizer in the yellow bar, and then we start to add 2 rates of phosphate, and the amount of plants per unit area drop. Then you start going across the graph from left to right, and you're going and you're adding the phosphate at 2 different rates, and now you're adding either 10, 20, 30, or 40, or 50 pounds of sulfur. So we talked about canola taking up roughly 0.9, let's call it a pound of sulfur per bushel of canola. And guys are struggling to get 20 pounds on, 30 pounds, 40 pounds on, and it's going in the drill blend or in the seed row. And all I'm pointing out here is the damage that you do to the seed by putting that much sulfur in conjunction with the phosphate there. If you have that struggle, the biosol is a prime position to talk about here, is building up that sulfur level to get the sulfur your crop needs, high requiring crop, canola or soybean, and you've got this potential for damage if you want to put it in the seed row or in the sideband. So you can manage your sulfur program long term and protect your crop. And if you're thinking about paying $10 or $12 for a pound of seed, and you're taking out, whatever, 15, 20, 30% of your seeds per unit area by fertilizer damage, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So it's a way to position looking at the biosol product in terms of seed safety. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is just the summary, and your group will have these slides so they can take a look, and they're welcome to call or text or email if they've got questions, want to chat about them. But when we started to get rates of ammonium sulfate, so actual sulfur, 20 to 30 kilograms, significant yield reductions in the emergence. So maybe not always a yield penalty, depending upon how many plants are removed, but a lot more open ground, a lot more weed competition, a lot more moisture loss. So it's not always about, visually what it looks like for plant damage, but all the open space caused by the lack of plants. And let's say this year you got flea beetles. Okay, normally you've got 5 to 7 canola plants per square foot, looks healthy, they can resist the flea beetles fairly good. But now you've taken out 40% of your plants, and you've got 2 to 3 per square foot, and you've got a flea beetle infestation, and you're not going to survive very well. So there's interrelationships or an integrated management factor to think about here with the biosol product and how it relates to seed safety, sulfur nutrition, and things like protecting against crop damage.
And the cost of putting it through your $1 million seeder when it's one of the most corrosive things on planet Earth.
Everything has a fit if you manage it properly, and I think that's been Alston's mantra, was managing things like biosol and elemental sulfur products is you have to think about what the product does and how you're going to manage it. And everything works if you use it properly. So this next couple of slides were done by a former grad student at University of Manitoba, Larissa Granco, Don Flayton, Cindy Grant, John Hurd. So Cindy's retired with Ag Canada. John's still at Manitoba Agriculture. Don's at the Soils Department, U of M, probably retire in 2 years. And Larissa is with the Pulse Group in Manitoba. So what they did here was they had a look at combinations of phosphate, that's the P2O5, and sulfur in the seed row. And this goes back to the seed safety comment, just to reinforce or emphasize that point about textural changes and dry conditions, let's say in the province of Manitoba and in southwestern Saskatchewan. And you got sandier soils, lighter textured, you got hilltops. You've got lots of moisture, you've got heavier soil. It's very forgiving to the seed place damage of sulfur and phosphate or sulfur by itself. But when you start getting to the drier, sandier soils, low in organic matter that need the sulfur, and you're putting that sulfur in the seed row, you can see on the lower part of the slide how many plants are left as you start to get to relatively conservative rates of phosphate and sulfur. I mean, that 18 kilogram or 18 pound per acre sulfur rate is not even enough to meet pretty much half of a normal canola crop in southwestern or southeastern Saskatchewan or Manitoba. So you are limited by, the product you're using in this case and the configuration of your drill. And so using a product like biosol allows you to think about the long-term management, protect against the sulfur leaching loss potential, but also the damage. Next one. I will skip this one. That's just for the geeks. Well, that one just relates to the high pH condition of most of Manitoba and why the damage occurs. High calcium carbonate. So elemental sulfur products like Biosol, we are going to apply them in advance of plant demand. It's a regular program, annual application, supply of continuously releasing sulfur, always something releasing, always something available, and what's left over, as I said, is going to be there for future use in terms of being protected against loss. We'll go up to the next one. This is the end slide. I made a comment before Dan opened up the recording about wearing a diaper at a phosphorus conference and closing the phosphorus cycle and sitting with a friend of mine, Mike McLaughlin from the University of Adelaide. Anyway, Mike is a world-renowned fertilizer guy. He's done a lot of work, and I just use this example with some work he did for Mosaic a number of years ago, and it relates to looking at an elemental sulfur product. And what he was looking at here was the placement of this product in a situation, and using Regina here as an example, same latitude, same environment, same pH that Regina has, type of Regina Great Plains. And it goes to this idea of the biosol being available in the year of application and then building over time, and what the colors in the bar represent. And if you just look at the far right graph, year 1 to year 6, is how one-time application of biosol can provide basically a 6-year time period of sulfur. And so you've got the application in year 1, and that in this case is availability in the blue bar in year 1. In year 2, the blue represents the availability from what you applied in year 1, and the red is what's come available in year 2. You go to year 3, you've got the residual from year 1, the residual from year 2, that's the blue and the red bar, and then in year 3, the green is what's come available. And then you go to the 4th year, and it's showing you what's left from the 1st year when you applied it, what's left from the 2nd year, the 3rd year, and the 4th year. And so it shows, in this example, how a product like Biosol, year 1 supplies, and it continues to apply, and for the course of 6 years, you've got that sulfur there and more coming available. And certainly the soil test comment removal, you can look at regular applications over the course of time. But in this application rate, this is an example I'm using to talk about, how you would look at using Biosol, and how one application, as you say at Aberhart Ag Solutions, lasts for X amount of years. And this is just showing you what's coming available for a product like that in year 1, how much is left at year 6, and what's been coming available in the preceding years of the 6 years of the application.
Love it. So thank you so much, Ray, for sharing your wisdom on sulfur. Like I say, it's always fun to find any excuse to work with you. How would folks get a hold of you if they have more questions?
Well, you had the LinkedIn up there. You've got my contact information. You can certainly share that with your group. So 403-589 2305.
Okay.
Text or call, and the email is ray.dowbenko. Just copy it from the top there. Hey, you can spell that at Outlook, outlook.com.
Awesome.
And so, like I said, the group's got the slides if they want to noodle over them and got questions. If they look at something and they want to ask more, I mean, this is through you and Aberhart Ag Solutions. I'm happy to help out. Your group, your time, they want to call or email, I'm happy to lend a hand.
Absolutely. Well, you shared some great thoughts on sulfur with us this morning, Ray. You educated us further, added some different perspective. And yeah, Rick's asking for your contact, so I'll send it to him, and you guys can connect and reminisce about the good old days, I'm sure.
Ricky. Yeah.
Ricky, Bobby, you guys will be quite the pair, we can only imagine. Thanks everyone for attending. Thanks for your participation on a bunch of different levels. And yeah, thanks, Ray.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks everyone. Have a great day. Take care.
Okay. Bye for now.